Onoskelis, the demon with donkey legs that seduced ancient Greece. Picture this. You're walking through the moonlit streets of ancient Jerusalem. The air is thick with incense and whispers. Suddenly, you see her, a woman so breathtakingly beautiful that kings have fallen to their knees. Her eyes promise secrets older than civilization itself. She moves closer, and that's when you notice it. Beneath the flowing silk of her robes, where human feet should be, there are hooves, the legs of a donkey. And by the time you realize what she is, it's already too late. Her name is Onoskelis, and tonight, we're diving deep into one of the most disturbing, seductive, and mysterious demons in ancient Jewish and Christian demonology. A creature so powerful that even King Solomon himself had to bind her with divine magic. But here's what nobody tells you. Her story reveals something terrifying about the nature of temptation, the architecture of evil, and the ancient world's understanding of demons that might just change everything you thought you knew about the supernatural. Stay with me, because what you're about to discover will haunt you. I'm going to be completely honest with you right from the start. When I first encountered Onoskelis in the ancient grimoire known as the Testament of Solomon, I thought I knew what I was dealing with. Just another demon, right? Another monster in a long list of supernatural entities that our ancestors created to explain the darkness in the world. I was wrong. Dead wrong. Because Onoskelis isn't just a demon. She's a window into the ancient world's deepest fears about sexuality, deception, and the blurred lines between the divine and the monstrous. She's a creature that embodies one of the most primal anxieties in human history. That beauty can be a weapon, that desire can be a trap, and that what appears most alluring might be what destroys us. Over the next hour and a half, we're going on a journey together. We're going to explore the shocking true origins of Onoskelis and where she came from in the cosmic hierarchy of demons. The spine-chilling encounter between this seductive demon and the wisest king in history. The hidden meanings behind her bizarre physical form. Why donkey legs, of all things? The disturbing role she played in ancient societies and the crimes she confessed to. How her legend connects to other demons across world mythologies. And most importantly, what her story tells us about the ancient understanding of evil, temptation, and the supernatural forces they believed walked among them. But I need to warn you, this isn't going to be a simple monster story. Onoskelis exists in a text that's part wisdom literature, part magical manual, and part psychological horror. The Testament of Solomon is one of the strangest documents to survive from the ancient world, and Onoskelis is one of its most complex and troubling figures. So buckle up, turn off your distractions, because we're about to enter a world where demons are real, magic is power, and a beautiful woman with the legs of a donkey might be the most honest thing you'll ever encounter. Let's begin with the moment King Solomon first laid eyes on her. Before we can understand Onoskelis, we need to understand the bizarre and fascinating text that contains her story, the Testament of Solomon. Now, you've probably heard of King Solomon, third king of Israel, son of David, the guy who built the first temple in Jerusalem. He's famous for his wisdom, his wealth, and that story where he threatened to cut a baby in half to determine its real mother. Sunday school stuff, right? But there's another Solomon, a darker Solomon, a Solomon who doesn't appear in your standard Bible, but who haunted the imagination of ancient Jews and Christians for centuries. This Solomon was a master magician, a demon binder, a man who commanded supernatural forces and bent them to his will through the power of God's name. The Testament of Solomon is a pseudepigraphal text, meaning it's attributed to Solomon but wasn't actually written by him. Scholars generally date it to somewhere between the 1st and 5th century CE, though it contains material that might be even older. It was written in Greek, and it circulated widely in the ancient Mediterranean world, copied by scribes, read in monasteries, and referenced by demonologists for over 1,000 years. Here's what makes this text absolutely wild. It's presented as Solomon's own first-person account of how he built the Temple of Jerusalem. But this isn't a construction manual. It's a demon summoning handbook. According to the Testament, when Solomon was building the temple, his favorite worker, a young boy, was being tormented by a demon every night. This demon would steal half the boy's wages and suck the life force from his thumb, leaving him weak and exhausted. Solomon prayed to God for help, and God sent the archangel Michael with a magical ring, a ring engraved with a pentagram and imbued with the power to command demons. With this ring, Solomon could summon demons, interrogate them, learn their secrets, and bind them to do his bidding. And that's exactly what he did. One by one, demons appeared before the king. Each revealed their name, their powers, the crimes they committed against humanity, and most importantly, what angel or divine name could thwart them. Then Solomon put them to work building the temple. It's genius when you think about it. The greatest temple in Jewish history, the dwelling place of God on earth, built by the very forces of evil themselves, bound and humiliated, forced to serve the divine purpose. It's cosmic irony on a biblical scale. The Testament of Solomon contains dozens of these demon encounters. There's Orneus, the vampire demon who started it all. Beelzebul, the prince of demons himself. Asmodeus, the demon of lust who would later become famous in Jewish folklore. And many others, demons of wind, fire, disease, madness, and death. But among all these demons, Onoskelis stands out. She stands out because unlike most of the demons in the Testament, who are male and often appear as horrifying monsters or abstract forces, Onoskelis appears as a beautiful woman. She's seductive, articulate, and strangely honest about her nature. She doesn't try to hide what she is. In fact, she seems almost proud of it. And when Solomon interrogates her, what she reveals is absolutely chilling. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Before we get to that confrontation, we need to understand what Onoskelis actually is, where she comes from in the demonic hierarchy, and what her bizarre physical form represents. Because those donkey legs, they're not random. They're not just a weird detail thrown in to make her creepy. They carry layers of meaning that would have been immediately obvious to ancient readers, but are almost completely lost on modern audiences. So let's decode this demon. Let's figure out what the ancients were really trying to tell us when they created a seductive woman with the legs of a donkey. When you hear donkey legs, what comes to mind? Probably something weird, awkward, maybe even comical. Donkeys aren't exactly the most terrifying animals. They're stubborn, sure, but they're also kind of cute in a goofy way. So why would ancient demonologists give one of their most unsettling demons the legs of a donkey? The answer lies in understanding how the ancient Mediterranean world viewed these animals. And it's way darker than you think. In the ancient Near East, donkeys had complex and often contradictory symbolic associations. On one hand, they were beasts of burden, symbols of hard work, humility, and service. In the Hebrew Bible, donkeys appear in numerous positive contexts. Abraham puts his son Isaac on a donkey when traveling to Mount Moriah. Moses puts his wife and sons on donkeys when returning to Egypt. Even the Messiah, according to the prophet Zechariah, would come humble and riding on a donkey. But there was another side to the donkey's symbolism, a much darker side. In ancient Egypt, donkeys were associated with Set, the god of chaos, violence, and the desert. Set was the murderer of Osiris, the enemy of order, the embodiment of everything wild and destructive. To call someone Set-like, or to associate them with donkeys, was to mark them as agents of chaos and moral corruption. In ancient Greece and Rome, donkeys were strongly associated with sexuality, and not in a romantic way. They were symbols of raw, uncontrolled lust. The satyr-like figures of Greek mythology, creatures of wild sexual appetite, were sometimes depicted with donkey features. The god Dionysus, in his more chaotic and destructive aspects, rode a donkey. And in the infamous Roman novel The Golden Ass by Apuleius, the protagonist is transformed into a donkey and has a series of degrading sexual adventures. Even more relevant to our story, donkeys were associated with demons and evil spirits across the ancient Near East. In Mesopotamian demonology, certain classes of demons were described as having animal features, particularly the legs or feet of beasts. These hybrid forms weren't just scary. They represented the demon's nature as something between categories, neither fully human nor fully animal, existing in the liminal spaces of creation. And in Jewish tradition, which forms the background for the Testament of Solomon, there were specific beliefs about demons and sexuality that make Onoskelis' form even more significant. Ancient Jewish texts are full of warnings about demons who seduce human beings, particularly men. The most famous of these is Lilith, Adam's legendary first wife who left the garden and became the mother of demons. But there were others, whole classes of seductive spirits called by names like Daughters of Night or Daughters of Lilith, who would prey on men, stealing their seed to give birth to more demons. These demons were believed to be incredibly dangerous specifically because they appeared beautiful and human. They could infiltrate human society, seduce the unwary, and corrupt the pure. The only way to identify them was through subtle imperfections in their form, and having donkey legs would definitely qualify. So when the author of the Testament of Solomon describes Onoskelis as having the legs of a donkey, they're encoding multiple layers of meaning. First, they're marking her as a creature of lust and uncontrolled sexuality, connecting her to the ancient Mediterranean symbolism of donkeys as hypersexual animals. Second, they're identifying her as a chaos agent, something connected to disorder and the inversion of proper categories. She looks human on top, but is beast below. Third, they're creating a marker that allows the wise, like Solomon, to identify her true nature despite her beautiful human appearance. And fourth, they're placing her in a specific category of demon in the ancient Near Eastern imagination. The hybrid creature, the in-between thing, the monster that walks the boundary between the human and the other. But here's what really gets me. The text emphasizes that she has a beautiful form, except for the legs. This isn't a demon who's ugly and scary. This is a demon who's gorgeous, alluring, almost irresistible, until you look down, until you see the truth that her beauty is hiding. And that makes her so much more dangerous than any monster that announces itself with fangs and claws. Because Onoskelis represents a specific kind of evil, the evil that comes disguised as the good, the corruption that wears the mask of beauty, the death that promises life. She's the ultimate wolf in sheep's clothing, or in this case, the demon in human skin. And when Solomon summons her, she doesn't disappoint. The scene is set in Solomon's palace in Jerusalem. The construction of the temple is underway, and the king has already bound several demons to his service. Word has spread through the supernatural realms. There's a human wielding divine power, and he's forcing demons to build for God. Some demons flee, others hide, but Onoskelis comes when called. According to the Testament of Solomon, Solomon doesn't have to search for her. He simply commands in the name of God, using the power of his ring, and she appears. This detail is important. Unlike some demons who resist or have to be dragged before the king, Onoskelis presents herself almost willingly. The text describes her entrance, and it's theatrical in the extreme. She appears in all her bizarre glory, beautiful beyond measure from the waist up, with the legs of a donkey below. She's not trying to hide what she is. She's not ashamed. She stands before the wisest king in history and essentially says, "Here I am. What do you want to know?" There's something deeply unsettling about this confidence. Most of the demons in the Testament show some level of resistance or fear when confronted by Solomon's power. They know they're beaten. They know they're going to be bound and put to work. But Onoskelis seems almost amused by the whole situation. Solomon, playing his role as the interrogator of demons, asks her the standard questions. Who are you? Where do you live? What do you do? What is your activity? And Onoskelis answers with a frankness that's genuinely shocking. She says, and I'm paraphrasing the ancient Greek here for clarity, I am called Onoskelis. I dwell in caves near the moon. I have a throne in the sky that moves around, always shifting, never still. Sometimes I strangle people. Sometimes I pervert them. I spend my time pursuing men who are born under certain astrological signs, particularly men born under the full moon. Let's unpack this confession because every detail is loaded with meaning. First, her name. Onoskelis in Greek literally means donkey-legged, or she with ass's legs. Unlike some demons whose true names are hidden or whose names are riddles, Onoskelis' name is a straightforward description. It's as if she's saying, I am exactly what I appear to be. No tricks, no illusions. This is me. Second, she dwells in caves near the moon. This is fascinating because in ancient cosmology, the moon was the lowest of the celestial spheres, the boundary between the heavenly realm and the earthly realm. The moon was also associated with change, instability, and influence over earthly affairs, particularly over matters of the body, sexuality, and madness. So Onoskelis isn't claiming to be from the highest ranks of hell. She's from the borderlands, the liminal spaces, the places where heaven and earth meet and blur. Third, she has a throne that moves around. This detail connects her to astrological beliefs that were dominant in the ancient world. Demons weren't just spiritual beings. They were thought to be connected to the movements of celestial bodies. They traveled with the stars, their power waxing and waning with astronomical cycles. Onoskelis' moving throne suggests she's an itinerant demon, a wanderer, never staying in one place, always on the hunt. Fourth, and this is where it gets really dark, she confesses to two main activities, strangling and perverting. The strangling is probably connected to beliefs about night demons who attacked sleepers. Across ancient cultures, there were widespread reports of what we now call sleep paralysis, the terrifying experience of waking up unable to move, often with a sensation of weight on the chest and difficulty breathing. The ancient world interpreted this as demonic attack. Demons like Onoskelis were believed to sit on people's chests while they slept, crushing the breath out of them, feeding on their fear and life force. But it's the perverting that's really the core of Onoskelis' identity. The Greek word used here is complex. It carries connotations of turning something from its proper nature, corrupting it, leading it astray. In the context of a demon who appears as a seductive woman and who specifically targets men, the sexual meaning is unmistakable. Onoskelis is a succubus. She's a demon of lust who corrupts men through sexual temptation, leading them away from their wives, from their duties, from their relationship with God. She represents sexual sin personified, desire that leads to destruction. And she targets men born under specific astrological signs, particularly those born under the full moon. This detail connects to ancient beliefs about how the positions of celestial bodies at birth determined not just personality, but vulnerability to supernatural attack. The full moon was associated with madness, transformation, and heightened sexuality. Men born under its influence were thought to be particularly susceptible to demonic seduction. Solomon listens to all of this. He doesn't interrupt. He doesn't condemn. He just takes it all in, This confession from a demon who seems almost proud of her work. And then he asks the crucial question. The question he asks every demon. What angel opposes you? What power can control you? Onoskelis' answer is telling. She says she can be thwarted by invoking the name of a specific angel. The text is a bit unclear about which angel exactly. Different manuscripts give different names, but the point is clear. Despite all her power, despite her confidence, despite the centuries she spent corrupting humanity, she can be controlled by divine authority. Solomon uses this knowledge. He binds her. He puts her to work. And according to the Testament, Onoskelis ends up spinning hemp to make ropes for the temple construction. Think about that for a moment. This demon of sexual corruption, this seductive destroyer of men, this cosmic force of chaos and perversion, she's reduced to making ropes. She's doing manual labor for the glory of God. It's humiliation on a cosmic scale. But here's what bothers me, and what should bother you too. Onoskelis never seems upset about this. Unlike other demons in the Testament who rail against their bondage or beg for release, Onoskelis accepts her fate with the same calm confidence she showed when she first appeared. It's as if being bound by Solomon is just another part of her existence, another phase in an eternal cycle. And that raises a deeply disturbing question. Is Onoskelis really defeated? Or is this exactly what she wanted all along? We'll come back to that question. But first, we need to explore what makes Onoskelis different from other demons in her class. Because she's not the only seductive demon in ancient mythology. Not by a long shot. Onoskelis belongs to one of the most widespread and persistent categories of demons in human mythology, the succubus. The word succubus comes from Latin, literally meaning one who lies beneath. It refers to a female demon who takes the form of a beautiful woman and has sexual intercourse with men, usually while they sleep. The male equivalent is the incubus, which attacks women. Together, these sexual demons appear in virtually every culture on Earth, under different names and with different characteristics, but always with the same basic function. They seduce, they corrupt, and they destroy through sexuality. But here's what's fascinating. Onoskelis represents an early and distinctive version of this archetype, and comparing her to other succubi from different traditions reveals a lot about what made her unique and particularly terrifying to the ancient Jewish and Christian communities that told her story. Let's start with the most famous succubus in Jewish tradition, Lilith. According to medieval Jewish texts like the Alphabet of Ben Sira, Lilith was Adam's first wife, created from the same earth as him rather than from his rib. When Adam tried to dominate her sexually, Lilith refused to submit, spoke the ineffable name of God, and flew away from Eden. She went to live by the Red Sea, where she gave birth to hundreds of demon children every day. When God sent angels to bring her back, she refused and was cursed to have her demon children die constantly. In revenge, she swore to prey upon human children and to seduce men in their sleep. Lilith and Onoskelis have obvious similarities. Both are female demons who seduce men. Both have a specific physical marker that reveals their demonic nature. Lilith often has bird feet or talons in her depictions. Both operate at night and target specific vulnerable populations. But there are crucial differences. Lilith is a rebel, a figure of defiance against male authority. Her story has been reclaimed by some modern feminists as a symbol of female empowerment and resistance to patriarchal control. Onoskelis, on the other hand, doesn't seem to have any agenda beyond corruption. She's not rebelling against anything. She's just doing what she does, almost mechanically, as if seducing and destroying men is simply her nature. Lilith is also much more dangerous in the Jewish imagination. She's the queen of demons, the mother of monsters, the enemy of children and pregnant women. She's cosmic in scale. Onoskelis, by contrast, seems almost small-time. Yes, she's dangerous, but she's not a major player in the hierarchy of hell. She's more like a foot soldier than a general. Now let's cross the Mediterranean and look at Greek and Roman versions of the succubus archetype. In Greek mythology, you have the lamiae, female demons who were once beautiful women but were transformed into monsters that preyed on children and seduced men. The original Lamia was a queen of Libya who had an affair with Zeus. When Zeus's wife Hera found out, she killed all of Lamia's children. Lamia went mad with grief and began devouring other women's children. Zeus took pity on her and gave her the ability to remove her eyes, so she could rest from the horror of what she'd become and the power to shapeshift. The lamiae that followed the original Lamia were vampire-like creatures who could appear as beautiful women to seduce men, but their true forms were monstrous, sometimes with serpent tails instead of legs, sometimes with animal feet, always with a hunger for blood and sex. Notice the parallels? A beautiful woman with animal lower body parts. Sexual predation. The blurring of categories between human and monster. But again, there's a key difference. The Greek lamiae are tragic figures. They're cursed, transformed against their will, driven by grief or divine punishment to become monsters. There's a sense that they were once good and were corrupted. Onoskelis has no such backstory. She's not a fallen woman or a cursed queen. She just is. She's always been this way, and she'll always be this way. In Roman tradition, you have the strangest, night demons that appeared as birds or women who drained the life force and blood of children. But you also have stories of beautiful female spirits who seduced men for various purposes, sometimes to steal their life force, sometimes to give birth to demonic offspring, sometimes just for the joy of corruption. The Roman poet Horace wrote about the strix, singular of strangest, as a horrifying night creature. Ovid told stories of supernatural seduction. These themes were everywhere in classical literature. But here's what sets Onoskelis apart from all of these: her honesty. Think about it. Lilith is a deceiver. She hides her true form and sneaks into bedrooms. The lamiae are shapeshifters. They appear as beautiful women but are really monsters underneath. The Roman strangest operate in darkness and secret. Onoskelis, though, she's right there in plain sight. Yes, she's beautiful from the waist up, but those donkey legs are visible. She's not trying to hide. When Solomon summons her, she doesn't lie about what she does or who she is. She just tells him straight up, "I corrupt men. I strangle them. That's what I do." There's something almost refreshing about this honesty, and that's exactly what makes it so terrifying. Because Onoskelis represents a truth that the ancient world understood very well. Sometimes evil doesn't hide. Sometimes it walks right up to you, shows you exactly what it is, and you still fall for it anyway. The beautiful woman with donkey legs isn't trying to trick you into thinking she's human. She's showing you that she's not. And the men she corrupts? They see the legs. They know what she is. They choose her anyway. That's the real horror of Onoskelis. She's not about deception. She's about the human capacity to choose destruction even when we know that's what we're choosing. She's about the moment when desire overrides reason, when beauty blinds us to danger, when we walk into the trap with our eyes wide open. And that brings us to one of the most important questions about Onoskelis. What exactly was she doing? What were her specific crimes against humanity? The Testament of Solomon gives us some clues, but they're cryptic and disturbing. Let's dig into them. When Solomon interrogates demons in the Testament, he's not just satisfying curiosity. He's conducting a systematic investigation of evil. He wants to know exactly what each demon does so he can understand how to counter them, how to protect humanity from their attacks. Onoskelis' confession is more detailed than many of the other demons, and when you parse it carefully, a disturbing picture emerges of a demon who operated on multiple levels of society, corrupting individuals, destroying families, and undermining the social order itself. Let's break down her activities one by one. Activity 1. Strangling. Onoskelis explicitly states that she strangles people. Now, in the context of ancient demonology, strangling had both literal and figurative meanings. Literally, it referred to the phenomenon I mentioned earlier, sleep paralysis and night terrors, where victims felt they were being suffocated or choked by an invisible presence. Ancient people universally interpreted these experiences as demonic attacks. They believed that demons would sit on the chests of sleepers, constrict their throats, and drain their life force. But strangling also had a metaphorical meaning. It could refer to the slow suffocation of the soul, the gradual draining of life and vitality through spiritual attack. A person who was being strangled by a demon might appear healthy on the outside, but would be slowly dying on the inside, losing their connection to God, to their community, to their own sense of morality and purpose. In Onoskelis' case, given her association with sexuality and corruption, the strangling probably refers to both the physical, night terrors, sleep attacks, and the spiritual, the slow death of the soul through sexual sin. Activity 2. Perversion. This is the core of Onoskelis' identity. The Greek word used here, and remember, the Testament was written in Greek, carries layers of meaning. It's not just about sexual acts. It's about turning things from their proper nature and purpose. In the ancient Jewish worldview, sexuality had a very specific proper place within marriage for the purpose of procreation and the strengthening of the marital bond. Any sexuality outside of that context was considered disordered, wrong, potentially demonic. When Onoskelis perverts men, she's doing several things simultaneously. She's leading them into sexual acts outside of marriage, adultery, fornication, or even just lustful thoughts that violate the commandment against coveting. She's turning their natural desire, which God created and which is good in its proper context, into something destructive and obsessive. She's redirecting their life force and attention away from their proper duties, to their wives, their children, their community, their relationship with God, and toward herself, a demon, a dead end, a void that can never be satisfied. And perhaps most insidiously, she's making them complicit in their own destruction. She's not forcing them. She's seducing them. They choose to follow her, to give in to desire, to prioritize pleasure over duty. This is key. Onoskelis' power isn't about force. It's about temptation. She offers something that looks good, that feels good, that promises fulfillment, and then destroys the person who accepts the offer. Activity 3. Astrological targeting. Onoskelis doesn't attack randomly. She specifically targets men born under certain astrological configurations, particularly those born under the full moon. In the ancient worldview, this wasn't superstition, it was science. Astrology was considered a legitimate way of understanding the cosmos and the forces that shaped human destiny. The position of stars and planets at your birth determined your temperament, your strengths, your vulnerabilities. Men born under the full moon were thought to have certain characteristics: heightened emotions, stronger sexual drives, a tendency toward madness or ecstatic states, a weakness for illusion and fantasy. They were, in the ancient understanding, naturally vulnerable to the kind of attacks Onoskelis specialized in. By targeting these specific men, Onoskelis was acting like a predator who hunts the weak or the isolated. She wasn't interested in a fair fight. She wanted victims who were already predisposed to fall. This detail makes her seem even more calculating and cruel. She's not just evil, she's strategically evil. She maximizes her impact by choosing targets who are least likely to resist. Activity 4. The multiplication effect. Here's something the text implies but doesn't state outright. Onoskelis doesn't just corrupt individual men. Through those men, she corrupts families, communities, and society itself. Think about it. A man who falls to Onoskelis' seduction doesn't just sin in isolation. He neglects his wife. He abandons his children. He fails in his duties to his community. He becomes a vector for further corruption. Maybe he introduces others to similar sins. Maybe he becomes abusive or neglectful. Maybe he spreads disease or scandal. One man's fall creates ripples that spread outward. And if Onoskelis has been operating for centuries, as the text implies, then she's personally responsible for the destruction of thousands of lives, the breaking of thousands of families, the corruption of entire communities. And all of it starts with a simple choice. A man sees a beautiful woman with donkey legs, knows what she is, and chooses her anyway. The haunting question. But here's what keeps me up at night about Onoskelis' activities. The text never indicates that she forces anyone. Other demons in the Testament are portrayed as causing disease, possessing people against their will, attacking the innocent. They're pure malevolent force. But Onoskelis? She seduces. She tempts. She offers. Which means every one of her victims chose to be victimized. And that's a much more disturbing model of evil than the monster who attacks from the shadows. Because it means that Onoskelis' power isn't really in her at all. It's in us. It's in human weakness, human desire, human willingness to trade the eternal for the temporary, the good for the pleasant. Onoskelis doesn't create the corruption in men's hearts. She just reveals it. She just gives it an opportunity to manifest. And when Solomon binds her and puts her to work making ropes, he's not really defeating her. He's just controlling one symptom of a much deeper disease. Because as long as humans have desires that can be twisted, as long as beauty can be weaponized, as long as people are willing to choose destruction if it's packaged prettily enough, Onoskelis will always have power. Even in chains. Especially in chains. Because there's something deeply symbolic about a demon of seduction being forced to make ropes, the very instruments of bondage. It's as if the text is saying, she binds men with cords of desire, and now she's literally making the ropes that symbolize her own technique. But the question remains, if Solomon really defeated her, why does her story still haunt us? Why does she feel so relevant, so contemporary, so perpetually dangerous? To answer that, we need to look at how her legend spread, evolved, and influenced demon lore for the next 2,000 years. After the Testament of Solomon was written, Onoskelis' story didn't stay confined to one text or one tradition. Like the demon herself, the legend traveled. But here's the strange thing. Unlike many demons from the Testament of Solomon, Onoskelis didn't become a major figure in later demonology. She's not in the famous grimoires of medieval Europe. She doesn't appear in the classifications of demons created by Renaissance occultists. She's conspicuously absent from the Malleus Maleficarum, the infamous witch-hunting manual. Even in Orthodox Christian demon lore, where you'd expect her to show up given the Testament's origins, she's barely mentioned. So what happened? Where did Onoskelis go? The answer is both simple and complex. She went underground. She became implicit rather than explicit. She stopped being a specific named demon and became a type, a template, a pattern that other demons followed. Let me explain. Phase 1. Early Christian reception, 1st to 5th century CE. When the Testament of Solomon was first circulating, it was read and copied primarily in Christian communities around the Mediterranean. Early Christians were deeply interested in demonology because they believed demons were real, active, and dangerous. Understanding demons was a matter of spiritual survival. In this context, Onoskelis would have been understood as a real entity, a specific demon with specific characteristics and vulnerabilities. Early Christian ascetics, monks and hermits living in the deserts of Egypt and Syria, wrote extensively about their battles with demons, including demons of lust that appeared as beautiful women. The Desert Fathers, as they're called, left behind texts describing their spiritual warfare. And while they don't usually name Onoskelis specifically, they describe attacks that sound remarkably similar to her MO. Beautiful female forms appearing to monks during prayer or sleep, tempting them with sexual visions, trying to break their vows of celibacy and draw them away from God. Saint Anthony the Great, one of the most famous Desert Fathers, reportedly faced such attacks regularly. His biographer, Athanasius of Alexandria, described how demons would appear to Anthony as beautiful women, trying to seduce him, trying to make him abandon his holy life. Anthony would resist through prayer, fasting, and invoking the name of Christ, exactly the spiritual weapons that the Testament of Solomon said could defeat demons like Onoskelis. So in the early Christian period, even if they didn't always use her name, Onoskelis' pattern was everywhere: the demon of seduction with the hidden flaw, the beautiful destroyer, the temptation that appears as fulfillment but leads to death. Phase 2. Medieval elaboration, 5th to 15th century CE. As Christianity spread through Europe and developed more elaborate theological and demonological systems, the understanding of demons evolved. Medieval theologians like Thomas Aquinas wrote sophisticated treatises on the nature of demons, their powers, and their limitations. In this context, demons became more systematized and categorized. The succubus as a general category became well established, with detailed theories about how they operated. Medieval thinkers debated whether demons had physical bodies or just created the illusion of bodies. They argued about whether demons could actually procreate or just steal human seed to create the illusion of offspring. They developed elaborate explanations for every aspect of demonic seduction. But Onoskelis as a specific demon largely disappeared from these discussions. Why? Probably because medieval European demonologists were working primarily from Latin sources, and the Testament of Solomon, written in Greek, wasn't widely available or translated. It circulated mostly in the Greek-speaking Orthodox Christian world, which was increasingly separate from the Latin-speaking Catholic world after the Great Schism of 1054. So in the West, Onoskelis' specific legend faded, but her archetype thrived. Every succubus in medieval literature carries a bit of Onoskelis' DNA. The beautiful form with the hidden corruption, the seducer who targets the vulnerable, the demon who operates through choice rather than force. Phase 3. Renaissance rediscovery, 15th to 17th century CE. During the Renaissance, European scholars became intensely interested in ancient texts, including magical and occult manuscripts. The Testament of Solomon was rediscovered and began to be studied again. However, by this time, the demon lore had become so elaborate and the categories so well established that Onoskelis didn't really need to be reintroduced as a separate entity. She was absorbed into the general category of succubi, seen as one example among many rather than a unique figure. Renaissance magicians and occultists who did encounter her in the Testament probably saw her as an interesting historical example of the succubus type, but not necessarily as someone they needed to summon or deal with separately. Phase 4. Modern scholarly interest, 19th to 21st centuries. In the modern period, as scholars began to study ancient texts with academic rigor rather than religious or magical interest, the Testament of Solomon gained attention as a fascinating historical document. Classicists, biblical scholars, and historians of religion all found it valuable for understanding how ancient people thought about demons, magic, and the supernatural. Onoskelis, as one of the most distinctively described demons in the Testament, has received some scholarly attention, but she remains obscure outside of specialist circles. Which brings us to an interesting irony. Onoskelis is simultaneously one of the most important demons in the history of demonology and one of the least known. She's important because she represents an early, pure example of the succubus archetype. She's in one of the oldest surviving grimoires. Her description influenced how later generations thought about demonic seduction. But she's obscure because that influence was diffuse and indirect. She became part of the general consciousness about demons rather than remaining a distinct figure. The cultural impact. Even though most people have never heard of Onoskelis, her influence is everywhere. Every story about a seductive demon, every tale of a beautiful woman who's secretly monstrous, every horror movie about sexual danger disguised as attraction, they all carry echoes of Onoskelis. She's in the vampire legends of Eastern Europe, where beautiful female vampires seduce men and drain their blood. She's in the fairy tales of Celtic tradition, where enchanting women lure men into the fairy realm, never to return. She's in the cautionary tales told to young men throughout history. Beware the beautiful stranger, the woman who seems too good to be true, the desire that promises everything and delivers destruction. She's in Keats's La Belle Dame sans merci, the beautiful lady without mercy who enchants a knight and leaves him dying on a cold hillside. She's in the femme fatale of film noir, beautiful and deadly. She's in every narrative about the dangerous woman, the seductive threat, the beauty that kills. And here's what's fascinating. In almost none of these later iterations do we see the donkey legs. That specific detail gets lost, but the essential pattern remains. Beauty that masks danger, seduction that leads to destruction, the choice that looks like fulfillment but is really a trap. Onoskelis' physical form might be forgotten, but her essential nature, her role as the embodiment of temptation and the revealer of human weakness, endures, which means she never really went away. She just became invisible, operating in the cultural unconscious, shaping our stories and our fears without us even knowing her name. And maybe that's exactly what she'd want. Because a demon who isn't named can't be bound. A threat that isn't identified can't be defended against. Onoskelis might have lost her name, but she gained something more valuable. She became eternal. Now we need to get deep. We need to talk about what Onoskelis means, not just as a story or a demon or a historical curiosity, but as a theological statement about the nature of evil, temptation, and human vulnerability. Because when you really analyze the Onoskelis narrative, it raises some profound and disturbing questions that ancient theologians grappled with and that we still haven't fully answered. Question 1. The problem of beautiful evil. In most religious and philosophical traditions, there's a tendency to equate goodness with beauty and evil with ugliness. This makes intuitive sense. We want the universe to be morally legible. We want to be able to look at something and know whether it's good or bad. But Onoskelis challenges this assumption completely. She's beautiful, explicitly, textually beautiful. The Testament doesn't describe her human upper body as merely attractive or pleasant. It emphasizes her beauty. She's gorgeous. She's alluring. She's the kind of beautiful that makes men forget themselves. And she's evil. Unambiguously, irredeemably evil. She corrupts, destroys, and kills. She's a demon, a servant of darkness, an enemy of all that's good. So what does this mean? The ancient Jewish and Christian answer was that beauty itself isn't necessarily good. Beauty is morally neutral. It's a quality that can be possessed by both good and evil entities. What matters is what lies beneath the beauty, what the beauty serves. But this creates a practical problem. How do you tell the difference? How do you know if beauty is a reflection of inner goodness or a mask over inner corruption? The Onoskelis story offers one answer. Look for the flaw. Look for the thing that doesn't fit. In her case, it's the donkey legs. No matter how beautiful the rest of her is, those legs mark her as other, as not human, as dangerous. But this requires wisdom, attention, and the willingness to look beyond initial attraction. And that's hard. That goes against every instinct we have. We're wired to respond to beauty. We're programmed to be drawn to attractive faces, symmetrical forms, pleasant appearances. And Onoskelis exploits this wiring perfectly. She shows us that evil doesn't need to be ugly to be effective. In fact, evil is often most effective when it's beautiful, because beautiful things bypass our critical faculties and go straight to our emotional and aesthetic responses. This is a deeply uncomfortable truth, and the ancient world knew it. That's why so much of their demon lore focuses on demons of seduction rather than demons of obvious horror. The monster you can see coming isn't nearly as dangerous as the one disguised as your heart's desire. Question 2. The problem of choice. Here's another deeply troubling aspect of the Onoskelis narrative. Her victims choose their fate. Onoskelis doesn't force people against their will. She doesn't force anyone. She appears, she offers, and men accept. They see the donkey legs. They know what she is, and they choose her anyway. This raises a fundamental theological question. If someone chooses their own destruction, is it really the demon's fault? Traditional Christian theology would say yes and no. Yes, the demon is evil for offering the temptation, but also, the human is responsible for accepting it. Both are guilty, the tempter for tempting and the tempted for yielding. But Onoskelis pushes this even further because she doesn't hide what she is. She's not deceptive in the way that, say, the serpent in Eden is deceptive. She shows up with donkey legs. She's honest about her nature and activities when Solomon interrogates her. So the men who fall to her can't claim they were tricked. They weren't deceived about what she was. They just didn't care. Or they cared, but they wanted what she offered more than they feared what she was. And this points to something really dark about human nature. Sometimes we choose evil not because we think it's good, but because we want it even though we know it's bad. Onoskelis represents desire that overwhelms wisdom, pleasure that trumps prudence, the moment when we know something will destroy us, but we reach for it anyway. And the ancient world didn't really have a solution for this. Neither do we. How do you protect people from threats they willingly embrace? How do you save someone who wants to be destroyed? The Onoskelis story doesn't offer an answer. It just shows Solomon binding her and putting her to work, which stops her from attacking other people, but doesn't address the deeper problem. Why were those people vulnerable to her in the first place? Question 3. The problem of eternal punishment. There's another layer here that gets even darker. According to Christian theology as it developed, demons are eternally damned. They can't repent. They can't be saved. They're locked into their evil nature forever. Onoskelis, in this framework, isn't choosing to be evil. She can't not be evil. She's a demon, and demons, by definition, are opposed to God. But if she can't help what she is she really responsible for her actions? And if she's not responsible, why is she punished? The standard theological answer is that demons did choose. Once, in the primordial rebellion when Lucifer fell and took a third of heaven's angels with him. That choice locked them into their nature. They had free will once, used it to rebel, and now they're stuck with the consequences forever. But Onoskelis' story doesn't include that backstory. She doesn't talk about falling from heaven or rebelling against God. She just exists, doing what she does, as if this is and always has been her nature. Which raises the possibility that in the worldview of the Testament of Solomon, demons aren't fallen angels at all. They're just demons, a different order of being, created evil or emerging from chaos, opposed to humanity and God not by choice, but by nature. And if that's true, then the whole framework shifts. Onoskelis isn't a tragic figure or a villain who chose darkness. She's more like a force of nature, a cosmic predator, something that exists because chaos and evil are part of the structure of reality. This is actually closer to ancient Near Eastern views than to later Christian theology. In Mesopotamian and Persian thought, demons weren't necessarily fallen angels. They were primordial entities, offspring of chaos, beings of the in-between spaces who preyed on humans because that's what they did, as naturally as lions hunt gazelles. If Onoskelis is this kind of entity, then binding her is the only solution. You can't redeem her because there's nothing to redeem. You can't change her because her nature isn't a corruption of something good. It just is. This is honestly more terrifying than the fallen angel model because it suggests that evil isn't an aberration. It's not something that went wrong. It's woven into the fabric of existence. There are things in the universe that are simply opposed to human flourishing, that want to corrupt and destroy us, not for any reason, not because of some cosmic rebellion, but just because that's what they are. And the only thing we can do is recognize them, resist them, and bind them when we can. The wisdom of Solomon. This brings us back to why Solomon's role is so important in this narrative. Solomon doesn't try to redeem Onoskelis. He doesn't try to understand her motivations, or reason with her, or convert her. He just identifies her, learns her weakness, binds her, and puts her to work. It's pragmatic. It's almost businesslike. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the story of Onoskelis is teaching us that when you encounter evil, real, irredeemable, ontological evil, you don't debate it or try to find the good in it. You name it, you control it, and you neutralize its ability to harm. Solomon's wisdom isn't in understanding Onoskelis. It's in recognizing that she can't be understood, only managed. And perhaps the deeper wisdom is this: know yourself. Know your vulnerabilities. Know where you're weak. Because Onoskelis can only destroy you if you let her. She has no power except what you give her. And the men who fall to her aren't unlucky or unfortunate. They're unwise. They didn't know themselves well enough to protect themselves from their own desires. Solomon, the wisest of men, doesn't fall to Onoskelis because he knows exactly what she is and exactly what he wants. He wants God's temple built. She wants to corrupt and destroy. Those desires can't coexist. So he binds her and makes her serve his purpose instead of her own. That's wisdom, knowing what you want more than what you want. And that's also why Onoskelis is such a powerful teaching tool. She's a test, an opportunity to choose. And what you choose reveals who you really are. Let's zoom out from the specific context of ancient Jewish and Christian demonology and look at the bigger picture. Because Onoskelis isn't unique. Every culture on Earth has stories of seductive supernatural entities that prey on humans through desire. Understanding these parallels helps us see what's universal about Onoskelis' story and what's specific to her cultural context. The Apsaras of Hindu and Buddhist tradition. In Hindu and Buddhist mythology, Apsaras are celestial dancers and musicians of extraordinary beauty. They're often described as the wives of the gods or daughters of pleasure. And while they're not exactly demons, they serve a similar function in many stories. They're sent to seduce and distract holy men. The classic Apsara story goes like this. A sage or ascetic is meditating, building up spiritual power through his austerities. The gods get worried. If this human accumulates too much power, he might challenge the divine order. So they send an Apsara to break his concentration by seducing him. The Apsara appears before the meditating sage in all her beauty. She dances, she sings, she makes herself irresistible. If the sage gives into desire and abandons his meditation, his spiritual power is dissipated. He's neutralized as a threat. Sound familiar? Like Onoskelis, the Apsaras use beauty and sexuality as weapons. Like Onoskelis, they target specific vulnerable individuals. And like Onoskelis, They're testing the spiritual strength of their targets. But there are key differences. Apsaras aren't evil exactly. They're following orders from the gods, maintaining cosmic balance. They're not trying to destroy humanity. They're just keeping individual humans from getting too powerful. Also, Apsaras can fall in love. Many stories tell of Apsaras who genuinely fall for the men they're sent to seduce and end up staying with them, becoming devoted wives or partners. Onoskelis, by contrast, seems incapable of genuine emotion or attachment. She's pure predation. The Yukiana of Japanese folklore. In Japanese tradition, the Yukiana, or snow woman, is a supernatural entity that appears as a beautiful woman in white robes, often on snowy nights. She lures travelers into the cold where they freeze to death, or she appears in their homes and drains their life force. Different versions of the Yukiana legend give her different characteristics. Sometimes she's a ghost of a woman who died in the snow. Sometimes she's a nature spirit. Sometimes she's explicitly demonic. But the pattern is consistent. Extraordinary beauty, deadly intent, and the seduction of men who should know better than to follow a strange woman into a blizzard. The Yukiana shares with Onoskelis that quality of honest monstrousness. She's clearly supernatural. Her white robes in the middle of a blizzard, her ability to disappear into snow, her ice-cold touch. These all mark her as other. Yet men still follow her. But unlike Onoskelis, the Yukiana is specifically tied to a natural element, snow, and a specific type of death, freezing. Onoskelis' corruption is more subtle, more spiritual, more psychological. She doesn't kill directly. She destroys the soul first and lets the body follow. The Rysalki of Slavic folklore. The Rysalki are water spirits in Slavic tradition, often depicted as beautiful young women with long green hair who live in lakes and rivers. They're said to be the souls of women who died violent deaths, particularly drownings or deaths connected to pregnancy and childbirth. Rysalki have a complicated relationship with humanity. Sometimes they're helpful, blessing crops and bringing rain. But other times they're vengeful and deadly. They lure men into water where they drown them. They dance so beautifully that men forget everything else and follow them until they die of exhaustion. During certain times of year, particularly Rusalka week in early summer, they're believed to come onto land and become especially dangerous to men. The Rysalki share with Onoskelis the quality of beautiful danger and the targeting of men specifically. But their motivation is clearer. They're driven by their own traumatic deaths, by revenge and grief, and a desire to pull others into the fate that claimed them. Onoskelis has no such backstory. She's not a transformed or corrupted woman. She's always been what she is. The Huldra of Scandinavian folklore. The Huldra is a forest spirit in Scandinavian tradition who appears as a stunningly beautiful woman from the front, but has a hollow back or a cow's tail. She seduces men, particularly charcoal burners and other men who work alone in the forest. Sometimes she marries them. Sometimes she drives them mad. Sometimes she lures them so deep into the forest that they can never find their way back. The Huldra is perhaps the closest parallel to Onoskelis in world mythology. Like Onoskelis, she has a beautiful human form with an animal feature that marks her as other, cow tail versus donkey legs. Like Onoskelis, she specifically targets men. Like Onoskelis, the animal feature is visible. She's not fully concealing what she is. But the Huldra has a complexity that Onoskelis lacks. In some stories, if a man marries a Huldra and stays faithful to her, she can become fully human and lose her tail. She can be redeemed through love. Onoskelis, again, has no such possibility. She's locked into her nature. The Churel of South Asian folklore. In South Asian tradition, particularly in India and Pakistan, the Churel is the ghost of a woman who died in childbirth or during pregnancy. She appears as a beautiful woman, but has backwards feet and long, pendulous breasts she throws over her shoulders. Churls prey on men, particularly men in the family of the person responsible for their death, often the husband who got them pregnant. They seduce these men and drain their life force, aging them prematurely and eventually killing them. The churel, like Onoskelis, has a physical marker that reveals her nature, backwards feet instead of donkey legs. But unlike Onoskelis, the churel has a specific grievance and targets specific people for revenge. What the parallels reveal. Looking at all these similar figures from around the world, some patterns emerge. First, the beautiful woman with an animal feature motif appears everywhere. It's clearly a cross-cultural archetype, something deep in human psychology. Second, most of these figures have origin stories. They're transformed women, ghosts, nature spirits with specific causes and motivations. Onoskelis is unusual in having no such story. She just is. Third, many of these figures have possibilities for redemption, transformation, or peaceful coexistence. The Huldra can become human. The Apsara can fall in love. Even the Rusalka can sometimes be appeased. Onoskelis cannot. She's irredeemable, unchangeable, eternally what she is. Fourth, most of these figures are tied to specific places, times, or circumstances. The Yukiana appears in snow. The Rizalki live in water. The Churel haunts specific families. Onoskelis roams freely, her throne always moving, attacking wherever and whenever she can. What this suggests is that Onoskelis represents a particularly pure form of the archetype. She's the essential pattern without the elaborations, qualifications, or humanizing elements that other cultures added. She's seduction itself, corruption itself, the danger of beauty in its most distilled form. And perhaps that's why her story has stayed so disturbing, even as her name has faded. Because unlike these other figures who can be understood through their histories or negotiated with through their desires, Onoskelis is simply hostile. She's not a wronged woman seeking revenge. She's not a nature spirit maintaining balance. She's not a cursed being looking for redemption. She's a predator, pure and simple, and the only response to a predator is to be stronger, faster, and smarter than it is. That's what Solomon's story teaches. And that's what makes it so relevant even now. Because the predators haven't gone away. They've just changed their forms. Now, let's get really analytical and look at why the Onoskelis story is so effective as a narrative about temptation. Whether you believe in literal demons or not, there's a deep psychological truth in this tale. The cognitive science of attraction. Modern neuroscience has revealed a lot about how human attraction works, and it's kind of scary how well the ancient Onoskelis story understands these mechanisms. When we see something beautiful, a face, a body, a landscape, specific neural pathways light up. The reward centers of our brain activate. Dopamine floods our system. We experience pleasure just from looking. This response is automatic. It happens before conscious thought kicks in. Our brain makes a snap judgment. Beautiful, therefore good, therefore approach, in milliseconds. This is called the halo effect in psychology. Attractive people are automatically assumed to be more trustworthy, more competent, more moral. We can't help it. It's hardwired. Onoskelis exploits this hardwiring perfectly. Her beauty triggers the automatic approach response. By the time rational thought catches up and notices the donkey's legs, the emotional attraction is already established. And here's the key. Emotional responses are stronger than rational analysis. Feelings override facts. Even when you know intellectually that something is dangerous, if it feels good, you're drawn toward it. The men who fall to Onoskelis aren't stupid. They're human. They see the legs. They know what she is. But the beauty is so overwhelming that it short-circuits their judgment. The power of desire. Onoskelis specifically embodies sexual desire, and sexual desire is unique among human motivations in its power to override everything else. Evolutionary psychologists would explain this in terms of reproductive drive. Sex is how genes get passed on. So our brains are wired to prioritize sexual opportunities even at great cost. But it's more than that. Sexual desire taps into our deepest needs. For connection, for validation, for pleasure, for escape from ourselves. Sex promises transcendence, even if just for a moment. Onoskelis offers all of this. She's not just sexually attractive. She represents the fulfillment of desire itself. She's the fantasy made flesh. Well, partly flesh, partly donkey, but you get the idea. And fantasies are powerful precisely because they're not real. They're perfect. They promise everything without demanding anything. They offer pleasure without consequences. Except, of course, that with Onoskelis, there are consequences. Terrible consequences. But by the time you realize that, it's too late. The illusion of control. Here's something really interesting about the Onoskelis story. The men who encounter her probably think they can handle it. Sure, she's a demon. Sure, she has donkey legs. But I'm strong. I'm smart. I'll just enjoy the moment and then walk away. I'm in control. This is what psychologists call the illusion of control, the human tendency to overestimate our ability to manage risky situations. We think we can dance with danger and not get burned. We think we can indulge just a little without consequences. We think we're the exception to the rules. Onoskelis destroys men who think this way, because once you engage with her, once you give in even a little, she has a foothold. And that foothold becomes a hold. And that hold becomes control. And before you know it, you're not visiting the demon. You're owned by the demon. This is exactly how addiction works. How affairs destroy marriages. How just this once becomes a lifestyle. The first step is always sold as being in control. The descent into powerlessness happens so gradually that you don't notice until you're at the bottom. The compartmentalization trap. Another psychological mechanism at work in the Onoskelis story is compartmentalization, the ability to hold contradictory thoughts and feelings without experiencing cognitive dissonance. A man can know that Onoskelis is a demon who destroys people and simultaneously believe that he personally will be fine. He can know that what he's about to do is wrong and simultaneously convince himself that it's justified in his particular circumstances. Humans are really good at this. We can believe one thing in the abstract and act completely differently in the specific moment. Demons are dangerous, coexists with, but this one is so beautiful. Sexual sin is wrong, coexists with, but just this once won't hurt. This will end badly, coexists with, but that's a future problem, and right now I want this. Onoskelis succeeds because she operates in the space between abstract knowledge and immediate desire. She's most powerful in the moment when the future seems far away and the present is overwhelmingly tempting. The corruption of judgment. Here's perhaps the darkest psychological truth in the Onoskelis story. Once you start down the path, your judgment becomes corrupted, making it even harder to stop. Psychological research on decision-making shows that we tend to justify our choices after we make them. We tell ourselves stories about why what we did was okay. We minimize the harms and magnify the benefits. We become invested in the rightness of our decisions because admitting we were wrong is psychologically painful. So the first time a man encounters Onoskelis and gives in just a little, he has to tell himself a story about why that was okay. And that story makes it easier to give in a little more the next time. And each subsequent encounter requires a new rationalization, which embeds the behavior more deeply. Eventually, the man's whole framework for understanding himself and his choices has been reorganized around accommodating his relationship with Onoskelis. He can't see clearly anymore. His judgment is compromised at a fundamental level. This is how corruption works. Not usually as a dramatic, sudden fall, but as a gradual drift where each small compromise makes the next one easier until you're so far from where you started that you don't even recognize yourself anymore. The role of isolation. The Testament of Solomon mentions that Onoskelis specifically targets men born under certain astrological signs. Men who are, in the ancient understanding, naturally vulnerable. From a psychological perspective, we might interpret this as Onoskelis targeting isolated, vulnerable, or psychologically predisposed individuals. Temptation is most powerful when we're alone. When there's no one to witness our choices, no one to hold us accountable, no community to support us in resisting. The men who fall to Onoskelis are probably men who are disconnected from family, from community, from strong relationships that would protect them. They're emotionally isolated, which makes them perfect targets. Because if you're lonely, if you're longing for connection, if you're desperate for validation and pleasure, a demon who offers all of that is almost irresistible. Even if she has donkey legs. Especially if she has donkey legs, because those legs prove that she's not like everyone else who's rejected you or failed to see you. She's other, special, forbidden, and therefore even more alluring. The wisdom response. So if all of these psychological mechanisms make us vulnerable to Onoskelis type temptations, what's the solution? The Testament offers one: wisdom. Solomon doesn't fall to Onoskelis because he has wisdom, and wisdom in this context means several things. Self-knowledge. Solomon knows his own vulnerabilities and desires. He's not naive about what tempts him, so he's prepared. Clear values. Solomon knows what he wants: to serve God and build the temple, and that clarity protects him from competing desires. Perspective. Solomon sees the long-term consequences, not just the immediate pleasure. He thinks in terms of legacy, not just sensation. Authority. Solomon has access to divine power through his ring. He's not facing Onoskelis alone. He has spiritual resources to draw on. All of these factors create a kind of psychological immune system that protects Solomon from the infection Onoskelis represents. And this might be the most practical takeaway from the whole story. You don't resist temptation in the moment of temptation. You resist it by building a life that makes resistance possible, by knowing yourself, clarifying your values, maintaining perspective, and staying connected to sources of strength beyond yourself. The moment Onoskelis appears is too late to start building those defenses. They need to be in place already. That's wisdom. That's what Solomon had that Onoskelis' victims didn't. And that's what the story is really teaching. Preparation, not just resistance. We need to address something that's probably been nagging at you throughout this whole discussion. Why is Onoskelis female? And what does the fact that she's a female demon targeting male victims say about the culture that created this story? This is delicate territory, but it's important, so let's wade into it carefully. The historical context of gender and evil. The Testament of Solomon was written in a deeply patriarchal society. Ancient Jewish and early Christian cultures had rigid gender roles and saw male and female sexuality very differently. In this context, female sexuality was often viewed with suspicion and fear. Women were seen as having the power to tempt men, to distract them from spiritual pursuits, to weaken their connection to God. This wasn't unique to Judaism and Christianity. Ancient Greek and Roman cultures had similar attitudes. So did most ancient Near Eastern cultures. The reasons for this are complex and disturbing. Partly it was about control. Men who held power in these societies wanted to control female sexuality because children, inheritance, and social order depended on knowing who fathered whom. Partly it was projection. Men experienced their own sexual desire as overwhelming and potentially destructive, and they projected that power onto women, blaming women for causing the desire they felt. And partly it was genuine fear. Because women did have a certain power in these patriarchal societies, the power of refusal, the power of choice in sexual matters, at least sometimes, and the mysterious power of life-giving through pregnancy and birth. This combination of desire and fear created a cultural context where female sexuality was seen as dangerous, something that needed to be controlled, channeled, and carefully managed. The demon as scapegoat. Into this context comes Onoskelis. She's female, sexual, and explicitly evil. She embodies every fear these ancient societies had about female sexuality. It's corrupting, destructive, allied with chaos and the demonic. But here's what's really going on. Onoskelis isn't really about women at all. She's about male anxiety about desire. Think about it. The men in the Testament who fall to Onoskelis aren't portrayed as innocent victims. They make choices. They see the donkey's legs. They know what she is. They go to her anyway. So Onoskelis is actually revealing something about male desire and male choice. She's exposing male weakness. But by making her female and demonic, the story does something psychologically clever. It externalizes the threat. It takes the internal struggle with desire and projects it onto an external enemy. Instead of saying, men struggle with lust and sometimes make terrible choices, the story says, there are demons out there who corrupt men. This is scapegoating, and it's not fair to actual women. The problematic legacy. Stories like Onoskelis contributed to a long and damaging tradition of blaming women for male desire. Throughout history, women have been veiled, sequestered, controlled, and punished based on the logic that their very existence tempts men. Women have been called witches and demons. They've been accused of seduction and corruption when all they did was exist in a female body. The beautiful woman is actually a monster trope has been used to justify misogyny, to validate male control over female behavior, to excuse male violence. This is real harm, and we can't ignore it just because we find the Onoskelis story psychologically or mythologically interesting. But also, and yet, there's something in this story that transcends its problematic origins. Because while Onoskelis is coded as female, the dynamics she represents aren't actually gendered. The pattern of beautiful exterior hiding dangerous reality applies to all kinds of temptations, not just sexual ones. The pattern of desire that overwhelms wisdom is universal. The pattern of knowing something is wrong but doing it anyway describes human nature, not just male nature. You could retell the Onoskelis story with the genders flipped, a male demon with some physical marker of his demonic nature, targeting women, and the psychological and spiritual dynamics would work the same way. Or you could retell it with no gender at all, just a person encountering a temptation that appears beautiful but is actually corrupting. The core truth the story is getting at, that we're vulnerable to what we desire, that beauty can be a trap, that wisdom requires seeing beyond appearances. That truth isn't dependent on the specific gendered form it takes in the Testament of Solomon. Modern readings. In the 21st century, we can appreciate the Onoskelis story while recognizing and rejecting its misogynistic context. We can say, yes, this story comes from a culture that feared and controlled female sexuality in harmful ways. Yes, it contributes to damaging stereotypes. Yes, real women suffered because of the logic this story embodies. And also, the story points to something true about human psychology and spiritual danger. The specific form it takes is cultural and problematic, but the underlying insight about temptation and wisdom is valuable. We can hold both truths at once. Some modern readers, particularly feminist scholars, have tried to reclaim figures like Onoskelis, reading her as a figure of female power and sexual agency in a culture that tried to suppress both. They point out that Onoskelis is honest about what she is, unapologetic in her power, and that she terrified the patriarchs. Maybe that's a good thing. Other modern readers see Onoskelis as a cautionary tale whose warning is still relevant. Be careful what you desire, because desire can lead you to destruction. Both readings have merit. The deeper pattern. Ultimately, I think the gender dimension of Onoskelis is both crucial and contingent. It's crucial because it shaped how the story was told, who told it, who heard it, and what it meant in its original context. It's contingent because the deeper pattern the story reveals, the danger of beauty, the weakness of human judgment, the power of desire, the need for wisdom, transcends gender. The reason Onoskelis still resonates isn't because she's a female demon. It's because she embodies something we all recognize, the experience of being tempted by something we know is bad for us, the feeling of desire overriding judgment, the moment when what appears beautiful reveals itself as deadly. That's not a gendered experience. That's a human experience. And maybe that's the most important realization. Onoskelis is wearing the cultural clothes of ancient patriarchal anxiety, but underneath, she's showing us something universal about the human condition. We're all vulnerable. We all have desires that can be exploited. We all need wisdom to navigate a world full of beautiful dangers. Gender shapes how that vulnerability manifests and how it's narrativized, but it doesn't change the fundamental reality that we're vulnerable. And that brings us to perhaps the most important question of all. Is Onoskelis still relevant? In our modern, secular, psychologically sophisticated age, does this ancient demon story have anything to teach us? Spoiler, absolutely yes.